Hello there and welcome to the Weather Studio Live. It's the 21st of January, can you believe that? I'm Clare and we've got a lot coming up on the show. Alex Deacon.
We have, haven't we? Even though the UK weather's not especially brilliant or amazing at the moment, there is a lot to talk about. We're talking about Australia again, but not bushfires this time. Severe hail and dust storms, also severe weather in Spain, huge waves, flooding and some snow in Spain as well. We'll have a little bit about the UK because we are in for a bit of a change, and we're looking at a storm of a very different kind, a solar storm, and we'll be talking about the Sky TV series Cobra, and we'll have our very own space weather scientist on to discuss that Sky TV show. Aidan is also here.
Yeah, of course, if you're watching this, you'll be watching on either Facebook, Twitter or YouTube, and you can, as always, send us your comments and questions and we'll do our best to answer them.
And especially if you do have any questions about space weather, because as I say, we do have a special guest on today's programme. But first
of all, look at this. You wouldn't want to be in this storm. Look at that. That's hailstones. And they are the size of golf balls. I mean, you know, Australia's been in the brunt of so much severe weather recently, and it just keeps on coming, doesn't it?
Yeah, huge hailstones over the weekend across from Victoria through ACT up to New South Wales as well. Huge thunderstorms, torrential rain, but the hailstones caused all sorts of damage, particularly going through car windscreens.
I mean, look at all those branches just coming down. I mean, you wouldn't want to be out. And actually, I'm sure there was a lot of damage associated with that, but it wasn't just hailstones, was it?
No, this is an image of a dust storm, again created by the thunderstorms, the gust front coming out the front of these thunderstorms, just whipping up the soil or the dust and creating. I mean, that's a terrifying image.
I mean, we normally see these in Sahara, don't we?
Yeah, Haboob.
Yeah.
Just a dust storm. Just imagine that heading towards you. It would be absolutely terrifying.
And this wasn't just a one-off. There were dust storms across New South Wales, in Parkes, in Narromine, and this one here was in Dubbo.
Was in Dubbo, yes, in Dubbo. This taken by Phil Welling. But there's loads of really cool videos, actually, if you just do a quick search on Twitter for the dust storms. The Guardian had a great
so they've been suffering
drone footage piece of this.
Yeah, I mean, it's been horrific. It really has. So they've been suffering with all that smoke, inhalation, etc. And now this doesn't help your health either, does it? It really does. And this is absolutely immense. So yes, there's a lot of footage on Twitter, and lots of information also on the Bureau of Meteorology website. If you are concerned, if you're flying out there, and in fact, it's going to get worse before it gets better yet again. We're still in the summer months of Australia. There's an active weather front coming in, a cold front coming across more southern areas of Australia, and that's going to produce some more strong and gusty winds. And with that, the danger for fire, wildfires, is going to increase yet again. Temperatures are going to go up yet again.
The situation has got a bit better over the last week.
Temperatures fell. We saw lots of heavy rain, which helped, but
it could get ramped up again as we go through the rest of this week. Yeah, the Bureau of Meteorology is great to follow them on Twitter as well. They've got some really excellent explainers about the weather across South Australia recently. Let's get a little closer to home now. Talk about some other severe weather. This isn't on our shores though. This is in Spain. Again, you've probably seen the footage. You've been across social media. Huge waves this time battering Alicante, and it's not just the waves and the wind, but there's been torrential rain as well, and also some significant snowfall.
Yeah.
Again, if you follow these guys on Twitter, meteorology, I think that's how you pronounced it.
Very good.
If you follow them on Twitter, there's loads of great footage, loads of videos like this.
So this was a deep area of low pressure named by the Spanish as Storm Gloria, which developed through the weekend into Monday. Maximum wind gusts around 70 miles an hour. Waves were up to around in excess of 8 metres. And not only that, we saw the rain turn to snow very readily. So there's blizzards. I mean, the interior of Spain is very cold during this time of year. And so 4 people have lost their lives already because of hypothermia, because of snow and ice, and because of debris just flying all over the place. The prone spots have been across central and eastern areas of Spain.
Run through. So this last 24 hours, so you can see the UK up here, relatively clear. We'll get back to the UK weather in a moment. But you can just see that swirl of cloud peppering eastern Spain and the Balearics over the past 24 hours. And signs that the back edge of the cloud, they're just drifting north to the Balearics. Things improving here, but it's in this zone where we're continuing to see very strong winds and heavy rain. If we run through the next 24 hours or so, you can see that it's not just rain, the bright colours there, just the south of Barcelona, but some heavy snowfall here and for the Pyrenees.
And also up towards the northwest as well. So there's going to be some very rough rides on ferries heading across from Plymouth and Portsmouth. And, you know, the government region of Catalonia has banned any outdoor activity at the moment. Severe gales associated with Storm Gloria. And it's going to continue over the next 24 hours at least before it slowly eases. But what's the reason why, Alex?
Well, I was just going to point out the fact that if you're going skiing in the Pyrenees, there's not been a lot of snow in the Pyrenees over Andorra. You might think this is good news, but look at those winds. Everything's going to be closed because of the strength of the wind tied into this weather system, which is, as you say, from Storm Gloria. But if we just take a look at the bigger picture, and actually we can see that it is linked to the UK weather in some way, because we, as you probably know, have a big chunky area of high pressure sitting over the UK, close to record-breaking high that over the course of the weekend. But if we just put the jet stream on, you can see why we've got high pressure across the UK. That jet arching up to the north of the UK, but then it's driving to the south. And it's just down here, it developed this cut-off low. This is high up in the atmosphere, but that cut-off low has allowed at the surface that low pressure to develop and intensify, and that is Storm Gloria.
And it's slow moving, that's the other thing. It's
That
not rattling across Siberia.
There's nothing to shift it on, it's kind of cut off and it just gets stuck in there, that circulation.
So wind's only slowly easing, but Alicante Airport was closed for 24 hours. So it's not just the locals there. A lot of holiday makers go to Costa Blanca and further north as well. So you really need to check your flights if you're heading to that part of the world over the next day or two. And I think there'll probably be more localised flooding actually, because we've seen about 350 millimetres of rain so far. And this is the warning zone for the next 24 hours or so. And it's looking, well, it's a massive area, isn't it, really?
Yeah, so they've got red warnings, amber warnings, and a large chunk of Spain there covered by yellow warnings. Still a yellow warnings for high waves around the Balearics, with that zone of red in there for rain and snow and ice interior across the northeast.
Towards the far northwest, it's where the low sort of pushes around on its northern flank. Some very strong winds coming in from the northeast as well, and some high waves there.
So that's meteoalarm.eu. It's quite a good website again for looking at weather warnings across the continent.
Now, in a moment, we're going to be talking space weather, but before that, Aidan.
Yeah, once again, a number of people asking about snow. For example, they've seen some wintry weather in Spain, wondering when it's coming to us. Amy Womble, Facebook, said, would like to know if the snow is coming to the UK in the south anytime this winter. And someone else asked about snow as well. When is the snow coming to Glasgow, folks? That's Ross McGonigal on Periscope. Well, there are actually no signs of any significant snow in places like Glasgow, south of the UK, in the near future, but there'll be some showers, snow showers in the far north of Scotland by the end of the weekend, and perhaps some sleet and hail showers a bit closer to lower levels across southern parts of Scotland, perhaps Northern Ireland. But that's about as wintry as the weather looks for the time being. However, as the weather, and we'll talk more about this in a moment, as the weather perhaps turns more changeable next week, of course, that means that you get more oscillation between higher temperatures and lower temperatures and so on. Another question, Carl Madge on YouTube. This was before we appeared on screen. All I can predict is that we'll see 2 checkered shirts today. And then when we appeared, he said, what? No checkered shirts? We've let the side down here.
Well, I mean, I think you've let the side down.
I have.
I don't think there's any complaints about this, is there? I mean, come on.
It's a departure.
It's a departure.
Yes.
It is definitely.
We were all surprised to see that one this
departure.
morning.
You know, it's January, New Year, new me, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, thank you for that. Last week it was my hair. This week it's my shirt.
We're all interested.
Just getting grief. Anyway, moving on to Cobra, which is a Sky TV series, and it started last week. It was out on Friday, and a couple of mentions of the Met Office. I haven't seen it. I am going to watch it, but I haven't seen it yet. I know quite a few people who have. There's been a lot of talk around the office about it, because the Met Office got a couple of mentions. Now, it's kind of a political drama in its entirety, but the first episode in particular is about how the government gets sent into a spin because of a natural disaster, and the UK is sent into a bit of a crisis, and that is caused by space weather.
Space weather. Now, we don't know a lot about space weather as meteorologists, but we do have a space weather department here in the Met Office. Only one of 3 in the world. The other 2 are in the US, and it's a 24/7 office because they're always looking at this behind us. That's the sun. That is the sun, ladies and gentlemen.
We said we didn't know anything about it, but Claire has just nailed it. That is the sun. We don't need a guest anymore because Claire, actually we do. Come on in. Let's come in and bring in Simon Machin. Thank you so much for joining us today, Simon. First things first, just describe what your role is here at the Met Office.
So my name's Simon Machin. I work here at the Met Office and I'm the Space Weather Programme Manager. So essentially I have oversight of the whole of the Space Weather Programme here at the Met Office. That encompasses the operational services that we provide to the user community through the MOSWOC, that's the Met Office Space Weather Operations Centre, but also the programme providing services for government, as well as the science programme that underpins the services and products that we produce for that user community.
It's quite a new department really relative to other departments like weather forecasting in the Met Office.
Yes, yes, and whilst the Met Office has had an interest and been doing work on space weather for around a decade now, the operational services and the MOSWOC was only established in 2014. So yes, it's a relatively new and operation that we've.
You've seen Cobra, and
Indeed.
The first episode is all about a solar event impacting the UK dramatically. And how realistic was it, basically? And talk us through what happened.
Okay, first of all, it was great to see space weather depicted on the big screen on television. That's great for us because it gets the conversation going. Space weather, I think, is a little misunderstood in some respects. As I say, it promotes that discussion and awareness. Now, as regards Cobra itself, the programme, I watched the first episode, I was reassured because the science underpinning that appeared to be very, very sound and robust. So that was great from our point of view. Some of the impacts may be towards the more severe end of the spectrum, but obviously we appreciate that television, they want to keep the audience engaged and want it to be an exciting thing. So whilst the impacts were realistic, they were towards the more severe end of the spectrum.
So what actually happened? What are you looking at the sun for? Okay. And why is that important?
Okay, well, so a lot of the time the sun appears as a constant ball of energy, providing light and energy to the Earth. But it does vary greatly due to a range of phenomena that are largely driven by changes in the sun's magnetic field. Now, the impacts that occurred within the programme on Cobra, well, the two main impacts, I suppose, were an aircraft crashing, loss of control, loss of avionics on the aircraft, and then also loss of electricity supply.
And why was that? What was that down to?
So that would be down to the impact of a solar flare, perhaps a radiation storm, but the main impact really associated with a geomagnetic storm. That emanates from something we call the coronal mass ejection, which is where
the sun spews out.
Absolutely, that's where the sun casts off a huge mass of plasma. Which can be many times the size of the Earth itself.
We've got a representation of this here. So this is the sun. It, every now and then just sends out highly charged particles between the sun, and they can impact on the Earth.
Absolutely.
Because they hit the magnetic field around the Earth.
That's right. So here we've got an indication of the sun, of the Earth and the magnetic field around the Earth, which most of the time deflects the worst effects of solar activity and space weather around the Earth. So it protects life on Earth. But on occasions, when we get these very large storms, and particularly when the magnetic configuration fits, and that was something that was mentioned again reassuringly on the programme, that they were looking for the southern configuration of the magnetic field, which is...
There was something in the programme that they said they wouldn't know whether it was north or south until like half an hour before it actually hit. Is that realistic?
Again, that's absolutely spot on. Whilst we can see the plasma and these coronal mass ejections lifting off the sun, we can observe those in near real time. The actual sensing that we have available to us today would only give us about 20 minutes notice in one of these really big events.
So there's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to whether one of these will actually hit Earth or not. But it has happened before in real time, hasn't it?
Indeed, it has. Back in 1859, was observed the largest geomagnetic storm of modern times, and Richard Carrington here on the image was the observer who visibly observed the very large solar flares in white light, and then through recording equipment at Kew Observatory recorded the very high magnetic field associated with that when it impacted on the Earth.
And what were the impacts back in 1859?
Well, indeed.
Didn't take any satellites down.
Well, back in 1859, the technologies we rely on today, of course, were absolutely nascent. So we're talking about telegraph communication systems, which were impacted because these induced some very high currents along these, which resulted in fires. They used to have wooden shacks, essentially, at the end of these, at the end of the telegraph cables, where somebody would a person would operate from, and in many cases these actually caught fire. But of course, all of the modern stuff, the Wi-Fi, the communications, the satellites that we rely on so much nowadays, of course, they weren't anywhere to be seen.
But they are in the firing line today, if like a huge coronal mass ejection was attracted to Earth. So I think the previous, that's it. So we've got the northern lights there. And
So they do make pretty things, these coronal mass ejections, and the sun does interfere with the magnetosphere and it creates the northern lights, but it can have serious impacts on satellites.
Absolutely, and these fellas, the aurora, whilst they're absolutely beautiful to look at, create absolute havoc with communication systems, with radar systems and such like in the vicinity. But more broadly, solar flares, radiation storms, coronal mass ejections can interfere with many communication systems, be it satellites, being systems that are trying to communicate through the atmosphere by creating disturbances in the atmosphere, and of course on the ground, where we rely on a ground station to receive, transmit signals and so on. Then these can be affected by loss of electricity, changes in electricity, harmonic effects within the electricity grid and so on. So,
and just during the Carrington event, it's reported that the aurora, you could see it as far south as the Caribbean. So that's how big that event was back in 1859.
Yes. So we think in the sort of event of the category of Carrington, which isn't necessarily the greatest we would ever see, it's just the greatest recorded in the last couple of hundred years. Auroras could be seen down to about 20 degrees north.
Wow. Actually, in Cobra, you could see there was an image of the aurora over London, wasn't there? Which is a very rare event. Generally.
Yes, it is a rare event. It does happen from time to time and has happened from time to time over modern times, over the last 50 years, but yes, pretty rare.
Now, if you go up to our operational centre upstairs, where there's forecasting for climate, weather, aviation, marine, there's also the Space Weather Department, which is actually where we all like to descend because there's lots of lovely pretty colours.
It is very. These are the screens that you have.
It's amazing.
So this is what happens if you're a space weather meteorologist. Then you are looking at the sun, you're looking at these images.
Absolutely, and these are images from SDO, the Solar Dynamics Observatory. That's a NASA satellite, and the different colours are reflecting different wavelengths that we're looking at here, which can help us to determine different characteristics, different phenomena that are occurring, beginning to occur or developing in the sun, on the sun itself. And the images here are what we call coronagraphs, where we pick out and image things that are actually lifting off the sun's surface. So in those particular images, the sun itself is blanked out so that we can see what's happening around it and what's lifting off.
This is actually from today.
This is today.
What's happening then?
Well, very little.
Well, that's good news, isn't it? That is good news.
That is good news. Our phones will continue to work for the rest of the day.
So at the moment, we're pretty well at a solar minima, so the sun has an 11-year cycle of activity. It goes between a maximum and a minimum of activity. It doesn't mean to say we won't see very large events, even close to the minima, but what it means is that the sun is generally less active. And that's exactly where we are today, and the sun is very inactive today. There are no sunspots on the solar surface, the sun is very quiet.
There's a longer cycle, isn't there? So there's this 11-year cycle that quite a lot of people know about, but then there's a longer cycle as well.
Indeed, there are longer term cycles and trends, and there have been periods in the past, such as the Maunder minima, going back 300 years, where there was a prolonged minima of solar activity, and it was during that time there were things such as frost fairs on the River Thames. There's no indication that at the moment that we're going into a prolonged solar minima. Early activity within the next solar cycle and analysis done by scientists are suggesting that the next solar maximum may be just a little higher than the last one.
Interesting.
So we are expecting an uptick in solar activity over the forthcoming years. And that's exactly why we need the MOSWOC and the Space Weather Service.
And of course, all that information
provide.
feeds into the climate change models as well, because obviously the sun and the effect of the sun and the cycle of the sun is obviously vitally important for those decadal and century forecasts.
I think Aidan's got some questions.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've more or less answered a lot of these actually just now, including that one. Kazim Awan on Facebook, how does this Met Office use solar activity data in medium and long-range computer models? Interested as solar activity has become an increasingly present factor in the realm of weather forecasting.
Yes, well, again, it is captured within the climatology of those longer trends. However, our ability to forecast solar activity over long periods of time is absolutely nascent, to be quite honest. So it's captured in a sense of longer term climatology rather than actually trying to predict over a longer time period whether those solar maxima and minima will be larger or less in extent. But as I say, we are expecting the next one to be a little larger than the last.
David Freeman on Facebook said the fact that the majority of communications are fed through underwater communication cables, the weather from the sun shouldn't affect global comms.
Well, that's possibly a misconception also, with the greatest of respect. A lot of undersea cables are actually fibre optic nowadays. Which does have some resilience, but the undersea cables still need to be accompanied by copper cables to provide power and to boost the signal as it goes under the sea. So where we have long distance fibre optic cables, there still is a potential vulnerability there.
Right.
That's interesting.
Fascinating.
Simon, thank you so much for that. Really appreciate it. We'll be talking
one more thing to show.
Sorry.
Actually, talk us through this matrix from the government, just to show where it lies in terms of the threat, in terms of an impact severity going up the y-axis there, and the x-axis showing the likelihood of occurrence in the next 5 years. So it's a matrix here. Obviously, this is the most severe, the most likely up here, and so we've got various different things of the government representing here. But space weather event is in here, so it's sort of a medium impact, but obviously you can get huge variations of depending on how big a solar flare it is.
So so this is where it's captured within the National Risk Assessment, which is essentially the National Risk Register that's owned by the Cabinet Office within Westminster. Space weather is one of the more significant natural risks that are captured within this. But of course, this is based upon a Carrington style of event and the likelihood of that. There are historical records to suggest that there could be, and there has in the past, been much larger events even than the Carrington event. So whilst this is considered to be the reasonable worst case scenario, it's not absolute, and the end of the scale could be somewhat larger.
So this is a natural, things like snow and frost up there. These are flooding, wildfires, drought and earthquakes in there. So it's reasonably high up on that matrix.
It is. And one of the differences perhaps with space weather is the global effect, whereas things such as snow, frost and so on are likely to be local or regional in scale. Space weather, when it hits and when we get big space weather events, they're global events. So not just the UK, but way beyond the realms of the UK and just Europe as well.
Fascinating. Thank you very much, Simon.
Thank you very much, Simon. Really appreciate it.
Really interesting stuff there. I should just point out as well, actually, there's a really good explainer on the Carrington event and explains a little bit more about space weather on our Learn About Weather channel, our sister channel on YouTube. So,
and in fact, on the podcast next week, we'll be talking to space weather experts about a big conference coming up at the end of the year. The ESA, the European Space Agency, always hold a conference in Belgium. This year it's in Glasgow. And so, yes, we'll be talking about that and other things associated with space weather. It's going to be
And I think we've put a link to that Carrington Space Weather Event explainer in the dialogue around this YouTube broadcast as well. So you should just be able to go and click on it, but not yet, because we're going to talk about the UK weather now. We talked a little bit about Spain earlier. Let's just go back in time and come back to where we are at the moment and talk about the UK weather, because as we discussed then, big chunky area of high pressure that's been dominating our weather for the past several days. We highlighted it, big change this time last week, because of course this time last week we were in the midst of low pressure after low pressure. It was all wet and windy, and we were highlighting that this high was coming in at the weekend, which it did. Brought many of us a beautifully sunny weekend. Now we're starting to see a bit of a change. There's a bit more cloud spilling in from the north, and this high is just starting to lose its influence. So if we run through the next couple of days, that high just very gradually starts to shrink away out into the Atlantic, and it allows this weather front just to topple in. Now, the effect of that is to increase the amount of clouds, just make it a bit misty and a bit murky. So we're going from what we call a clean high that it was over the weekend, which allowed a lot of sunshine. There's not a lot of cloud, a lot of descent, it's very dry. To now, as the high shrinks away, there's more moisture coming in from the Atlantic. These weather fronts increasing the moisture, increasing the clouds. So it's going to be misty and murky. It's a dirtier high for the rest of the week.
Actually, there was quite a lot of dense fog over the weekend in the north, which is really, it was just horrible, because I went on a train from Kent, beautiful blue sky on a Sunday, and then by around North Midlands, it just went from sunshine to murk. It was pretty unpleasant. And we've got more of that to come. Yeah,
thick freezing fog again tonight, likely across the far south, but actually we're more likely to see clearer skies developing a bit further north perhaps. But yeah, mist and fog again across the south, where there will be a frost. But just gradually, the high starts to shrink away, the centre of the high, but still pressure's reasonably high across the UK for the rest of this working week. It means there's not going to be a lot of rain, so it is an awful lot drier this week, and that will last until Thursday. In the northwest, we get this active weather front coming in. That will drive south, and again, just bring a bit more cloud. So increasingly, the rest of this week, dry, yes, for the majority, but we're just going to see more and more cloud. More and more cloud means less frost at night and less sort of radiation fog, less freezing fog. But as the cloud increases, there'll be more misty, murky conditions over the hills. Hill fog is going to become more of an issue. So the high slowly but surely shrinks away. This weather front just starts to introduce a bit of a change, and then the high is pretty much gone by Friday, and this low pressure starts to edge in. Still going to be pretty dry through Friday and indeed into the start of the weekend. But I'm going to show you the jet stream now. Remember how the jet stream is arching way to the north of the UK and then driving south across Spain. Just look at what's happening here as we go through Friday and more particularly into the weekend. A powerful jet starts to stream out of North America, and that drives this weather front. The system itself heads up to Iceland. This weather front will bring some rain slowly but surely from west to east during Saturday. So in eastern areas, it's largely dry until at least Saturday. That weather front moves in. Look at this. This is the jet stream just getting going again, just getting energized. And it looks like as we run through Saturday and into Sunday, these weather fronts will come in and just the jet start to picking up these extra areas of low pressure down to the south across the Atlantic, and that is real signs of a big change as we go into next week. The jet stream, the low pressures are back, it's turning wet and windy, but notice also the winds. These are the winds high up, but the winds at the surface will be coming in from the southwest. Although there's some colder air behind this cold front, generally as the weather patterns look down to the southwest, it's going to be relatively mild, so not a lot of snow. We'll see some in the snow showers on Sunday across Scotland, over hills, but even to lower levels, possibly in the showers on Sunday across Scotland. But that's about it for snow lovers in the short to medium term.
Visibility should be a bit better though, shouldn't it?
Yeah, we'll start to lose the fog problems, but the wind's really picking up, especially, there's a lot of uncertainty about this system as it comes in. This is sort of end of Sunday into Monday. As it approaches, it could be a develop, and it could bring quite windy conditions across the UK on Monday in particular. So it's all changed from the dry weather that a lot of us have had for most of this week with the mist and the fog. We're back to wet and windy weather, it looks like. That change happening over the weekend and lasting into next week. There'll be more on that in the 10-day trend tomorrow, which is me. Someone says me again tomorrow. Someone did ask that, I know.
Aidan, any questions?
Stevie Wells, 74 on YouTube. What is freezing fog? Well, it's simply fog that occurs when the temperature outside is below zero. That at the 1 o'clock, on the 1 o'clock observation, was still present in Yeovilton. So most of southern Britain at the moment is about 5 to 7 degrees and largely sunny. But Yeovilton's still got that freezing fog, -1 degree at 1 o'clock. Can be quite stubborn, freezing fog this time of year. And also, you were talking, Claire, about the fog in the northwest over the weekend. Paul Markman asked why they got so much stubborn fog over the weekend. And as I can remember, I think there was a subtle drift of wind from the Irish Sea that brought in some additional moisture across northwest England during Saturday and Saturday night. And then with that high pressure building, you had light winds, you had temperatures falling away, and you had that fog forming through the night in that area, just because the moisture in the air was just that little bit higher due to the wind direction. And that's why you had fog, and that's why it stuck around through much of Sunday. Let's see, a few more questions. Well, a question, Chesney Saxon on Facebook. Bad spell of winds next week. Yeah, could be. We're watching Monday quite closely. Could be a deep low coming in. Some very different weather for the start of next week. Back to talking about wind and rain. And with the jet stream becoming a bit more active, always the potential for other low pressure systems to come through at times next week. And snow.
It's always the big question of this time of year. People are desperate for it. Yeah, there's no real sign. As I said, there'll be some in the showers across Scotland on Sunday. We're going to get back to that kind of weather pattern where the weather's just shifting. So with the jet stream active, the lows come in, and behind them you can get a cold plunge, but it doesn't really last. All the while the weather's coming in from the Atlantic, so there'll be a few snow showers across Scotland, maybe northwest England, over the hills in Northern Ireland, but there's no real sign of any cold plunge. Remember, to get a proper cold spell, we need the jet stream to be in a different position to allow easterly winds to bring in colder air, or northerly winds to bring in a colder air. And there's no real signs of that. The jet stream is getting energized again next week, and it will probably stick around like that for a while to come. But we're not even in February yet, so you still can get some snowy events.
So anyway, Ed Hawkins has been busy, hasn't he?
Yes, moving on to some climate. If you're not following Ed Hawkins on Twitter, you probably should be. Professor Ed Hawkins, he's the guy who came up with the climate stripes. You must have seen that they've been everywhere. Really iconic way of showing the climate change over the past 150 years.
What is this, though?
But yesterday he tweeted this, new global temperatures for the last 2019 years. Yes, they've taken the data back. Now, it's not as detailed, obviously, because we don't have thermometers back beyond about 150 years. So they're using different methods to interpret the temperature back to 1 AD. So he's gone through the centuries, the 2 millennia, and we've got the developed climate stripes. Because a lot of people always say, oh, what about when it got colder before? And of course, accurate temperature measurements really only from the 1850s onwards, when we have thermometers. But now, using lots of different methods, and there's a whole thread on his Twitter feed about how he's come up with these as well. But actually, it's really interesting. And again, it does show that for most of the 2,000 years, there's no great variation. It actually shows that the last 1,000 years, it was gradually getting colder. And then you get to the last 150 years, and you just see that dramatic jump to red.
And it's not difficult to measure global temperature going back this far. There's lots of scientific papers out there which measure global temperature going back 40,000 years through ice cores. So measuring the CO2 within the trapped bubbles of air within the ice core going down hundreds of meters. And then eventually you can come up with something like this. And yes, it's certainly a telltale sign.
Yep, absolutely, but it does show. And speaking of measuring things going back a long way, the Mostly Weather podcast about sea level rise. Yeah. Really interesting, actually. Mm-hmm. So go and look at that, and it talks about measuring the sea level rise and how people have done that over millennia. Mm-hmm. Fascinating bit. So yeah, Mostly Weather podcast, which is available on all podcasting sites.
So thanks very much for watching. Please do tune in through the week. Obviously, we post all our weather forecasts on YouTube, on Twitter, on Facebook, and tomorrow 10-day trend. And obviously, the Weather Snap podcast comes out on Thursday. And we'll be back next week, next Tuesday.
We will. Yes, thank you very much for watching.